104. We're also here with our in-studio audience of one, Norm McCarter. Welcome back, Norm.
Good morning, Mr. Hare. Thank you.
Norm's been out in the world making money. How dare he? Doesn't he understand where we are? Oh, this is capitalism. We're supposed to be making money. Okay, Norm is free. No charges for him. He's out here making money. Okay. And we're here with our citizen of the 21st century who understands all of this, information technology and so on. Willie H. Welcome, Willie. Thanks for doing the live streaming of the program.
Welcome, everybody, to Living for the People with L. Nathan Hare.
So we want to take a bit of time today to help us just really understand what is true about what's being said and how it's being said so that we can make proper decisions about whether or not we support or don't support something. Let me give you an example. You could shoot somebody and kill them, and one person could look at that situation and feel the shooter should go to prison or get hung. Another person could look at that situation and say, I'm glad the shooter was there because they stopped the person who got shot from shooting other people. We've seen that happen in recent weeks, right? You've seen a shooter get killed who had already, this case in Tennessee, right? Wasn't there 3 kids that were killed, 3 adults that were killed? If the police had not acted as quickly as they did and as, what's the right word? They took the shortest route to solve the problem. They didn't go through a whole lot of negotiations and, offering people candy, and stuff like that. They just said, no, this can't happen. Shot that person right away. Now, I'm sure somebody in that person's family feels like, boy, you shouldn't have shot my kinsman.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure the kinsmen of the other people that were in that school are really glad that somebody shot that person. My only point in saying that is that context provides the basis for how you understand everything, right?
Right.
So in the Donald Trump case, you may look at this case and say, well, I understand that Donald Trump clearly did some things that were wrong. I just don't think they were wrong enough, for him to have been indicted and paraded before the world, as a potential felon. You have the right to that opinion. That's a real opinion. That's not fake news. That's a real opinion. Mm-hmm. But you have other people who will say that people get away with doing this stuff all the time. They violate tax law. Mm-hmm. They violate business records law. They violate, all kinds of state statutes, and they get away with it.
Right.
And we're going to talk about, Willie H's cousin, the husband of Ginny Thomas. See how I snuck that in there? Right. The husband of Ginny Thomas.
Clarence? Not Clarence.
Clarence, right?
Cutting Clarence.
See, and we're going to be talking about how he's going to say that, there are some things that maybe you feel I should not have kept, but I kept them because I'm Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice, the first or the second black, Supreme Court Justice in the history of America. I'm almost like Idi Amin. I'm almost Dada, right? So, but we have to understand context. How do you feel about that? Now, a lot of you that are with the gun people are also with the Clarence Thomas type people.
Of course.
But a lot of you are looking at this Clarence Thomas stuff and say, are you kidding me? This man is taking $500,000 vacations. This man is getting gifts, $19,000 gifts, and things that are just stored up in his house. He's taken $10 to $15 million worth of favors from just one donor. I'm not feeling that. That feels like my government is being purchased. I don't want my government to be purchased.
I'm sure that's the reason he got into the business, or even for that fact, married who he married.
Well, I'm going to hope that Willie H. is just being cynical and that's just not true.
It is what it is. It's so obvious. It is what it is.
So let me just talk a little bit about the case against Donald Trump so that we're just clear about what the case actually is. This is a research project that was engaged in by the New York Times. Now, you may feel the New York Times is a progressive or a liberal or whatever you call it newspaper. I don't think it is. But if you think that about the New York Times, you can't question the New York Times history of integrity in its reports. When they do research reports, they're really highly sophisticated, highly documented reports, so that you can have some confidence in the perspective that they're sharing with you. So here's what they said. The New York Times researchers provided this analysis that states that we can now say, this is quoting the New York Times, we can now say that there's nothing novel or weak about the case that Alvin Bragg is bringing against Donald Trump. The charge of creating false financial records is constantly brought by DA Bragg and other New York DAs. In particular, the creation of phony documentation to cover up campaign finance violations has been repeatedly prosecuted in New York. That is exactly what Mr. Trump stands accused of. Now, I want us to understand, Trump is being accused of these things, but the level he's being accused may be what people are having an issue with. They may feel like, well, these are just misdemeanor type crimes, that Trump is being accused of. The crimes have been elevated to become federal crimes because the crimes appear to have been committed in order to enable the commission of a felony, even though they may not cite what the particular felony is. But that's what the theory of the case is, that the misdemeanor was turned into a felony, and you may feel, well, that shouldn't have been done. But I would go the other way with that. I would say whether it was a felony or a misdemeanor conviction, it's still a crime. Mm-hmm. A misdemeanor gets you a year in jail. Right. If you have 34 misdemeanors committed and they make you serve those sentences consecutively, you could do 34 years in jail. Wow. That's serious, right? Right. So the media has trumped up the assertion that the Trump case was unusual and based on an untested theory justifying the charges and whether they should be misdemeanors or felonies. The fact is that Mr. Trump is the 30th defendant to be indicted on false records charges. Just by Alvin Bragg's office alone, he's only been there for 13 months. So in 1 year, he's already brought 30 of these cases, and those cases involved 151 counts, or charges in the indictments. So the claim that this was a novel, prosecution, that nobody ever gets, prosecuted for stuff like this, that's just patently untrue. This is what happens. This is what I'm trying to get us to understand. The Republicans do this all the time. They trot out something that is only partially true, or might not even be partially true, but it just sounds like it might be partially true. They'll trot that out as if it's the truth, mm-hmm. and get you to react to something that they trot out that really don't have anything to do with what's going on. The reality is the Republicans are saying that this is trivial, it's a weak case, and it's a trivial accusation that's being made against Donald Trump, when the reality is that's not true. The truth is just Alvin Bragg's office alone in the last 13 months have indicted 30 different or brought 30 different cases involving the exact same thing that we're talking about right now. Wow. Right? So that should just end that conversation. The underlying facts upon which the case is based, which is the rest of the story, is Trump arranged for his attorney, Michael Cohen, to pay hush money to Stormy Daniels during the last 2 weeks of the 2016 presidential campaign. That statement is not disputed. Both Trump's lawyers and Alvin Bragg's lawyers agree that that is a true statement. So we don't get to argue about that. Second, Trump repaid Michael Cohen for the money he paid to Stormy Daniels, but he labeled the payments as legal expenses. That is not in dispute. The checkbooks, the general ledger, the checkbooks of Michael Cohen all agree that these payments were labeled as legal expenses when in fact no legal services were provided. That's not in dispute. Then in the indictment, there are 11 counts for false invoices, 11 for false checks and check stubs, and 12 for false general ledger entries. Now, this shows you that the the conspiracy to defraud was carried across more than one instrument. It wasn't just like, notation in your checkbook. You have your check stub and you put a little notation, here's what the check was for. Those were in there too. But in addition to that, in the check that Donald Trump wrote to Michael Cohen, he wrote on the check legal expenses. In the general ledger for the Trump organization, or the other, because he had another corporate, I think they call it Enterprise or something like that, or Excelsior, something, a corporation that Donald Trump had made up just for this purpose. He had a corporation created just for this purpose and passed the money through that corporation, and then had that corporation label the expense to Michael Cohen, or the payment to Michael Cohen, to label that expense legal expenses to that fake, well, not fake, but that new corporation that he had created. That being the case, then clearly you were conspiring to defraud the government from knowing what they would need to know to regulate what you were doing. That's regulated activity. But you can't regulate it if you don't know about it. And he hid the activity, yes, right? And made it appear as if it was a legal expense when it wasn't a legal expense. I'm going to get you one more piece on that.
Not at all.
One more piece on that. They didn't talk about it as much in this document, but this is another part of the story. If you record this as a legal expense in the general ledger of a corporation, when that corporation files its tax return, it's going to put into the tax return what the expenses were of the corporation. If you put $130,000 down as a legal expense, then when you do your tax return, it's going to be reflected on your tax return that this is a reduction of the corporation's income because it was offset by this expenditure. Corporations get to deduct their business expenses from their corporate income. So it doesn't explain how the $130,000 got into Excelsior Corporation in the first place. He could say, well, I fronted that money, as seed money for my business. And then you spent every dime of the seed money to give it to Michael Cohen. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what we have. You start to reveal, as you start to break this case up and unpack it, you start to see the inconsistencies and the deception that goes on here. Go ahead, Nora.
This is just kind of an observation. I'm looking at this as I'm someone that's trying to get started with a business, and when you do, you wanna kind of distance yourself in a way from the business and start a corporation so that just in case anything happens,
it's on the corporation, not on you.
On the corporation,
right.
Yeah, not you. So I'm looking at this Excelsior Corporation as just that. He's basically. We won't say that Mr. Trump is not a very smart individual. He's smart, but he's doing things underhand.
Let's say this. He's cunning.
He's cunning. Very cunning.
Right.
And guys, we also got to understand that a lot of businesses like Mr. Trump, millions, billions of dollars, they do stuff like this all the time. So I'm not saying, what that's illegal, but this is what
it's status quo.
And that's what you just said there is the point. It is true that businesses, politicians, campaign organizations all do things, where they test the rules, they get on the fringes of the rules and so on. They all do stuff like that.
Right.
So that's not what the issue is. The issue is when you get caught.
Right.
You can't turn around and say, well, you didn't catch that person over there. I know he does it. Right. That's not a defense. Right. So the fourth piece on it was the alleged these 34 misrepresentations, the 11 counts of false invoices, the 11 accounts for false checks and check stubs, and the 12 counts of general ledger entries. Collectively, they violated the false record statute when various entries were made in business documents describing those payments as legal fees. Trump also arranged for the payment of hush money to a woman named Karen McDougal through the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer actually paid her to shut her up, what they call a catch and what is it? Catch and
release?
No, not catch. It's catch and trap or something like that. What they do is they buy off a person. So they give you a piece of money and buy your silence. You sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Okay.
And then they don't have to worry about you running around telling people, well, I know it's only 2 days from the election. I just want you to know I was in bed with Donald Trump. Here's my stuff. Remember the case with Bill Clinton? Yeah. The thing that really got Bill Clinton in the most trouble, if you remember that story, if you go back and read it if you haven't, but what got him in the most trouble was when they pulled out the dress. The dress. She kept a dress that she said had some of his body, See, I try to be nice.
Body fluid, sorry.
Some of his body fluid, on it. And even, I don't know how much it was. I'm not thinking it was drenched in body fluid and whatnot. It was probably just, a 1 or 2 inch, stain or something.
A little aftermath.
But whatever it was, in the minds of American voters, that seemed to sensationalize the issue to a much higher extent than it was sensationalized before. Before that, it was like, okay, a little hanky-panky over there, he kissed you. Leave me alone. Right. I don't want to hear it, right? But when they trotted out the dress, and the dress had, the evidence of the crime, right? Wow. That seemed to really mess with people's minds because people are visual learners, right? People are tactile learners. And so the things that are abstract are easy for you to set aside in your mind. You compartmentalize it and just sit it over there in the back someplace. But the things that you can touch, that you can see, that you can smell, those things tend to be like fire, in your memory banks. You remember that stuff, right? So that's what's going on here. Trump arranged for the payment of this hush money through the National Enquirer with payments and with the payments to Stormy Daniel. The goal was to ensure negative publicity would not come out that would damage Trump's candidacy in the closely contested presidential race. Now, you're going to hear people say, well, Trump won the race, so, it didn't help him, or it didn't help Hillary Clinton. That's not the point. The point is that it was not only was it a close race, if you recall, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump got in the race. So it couldn't be much closer than that. I mean, so close that you actually lost the popular vote in the race. If it was not for this system of the Electoral College that we have, Trump would have lost that race and Hillary Clinton would have been the president of the United States, right? So it's important we understand that. So if the jury receives the information I just shared with you, and the jury accepts this line of reasoning, this theory of the case, by definition, Trump would have engaged in attempts to violate state and federal election laws. In this theory, the false records in the indictment covered up the campaign finance violation. Now, there is also the inference that by calling the payments legal expenses recorded in the Trump Organization's general ledger, in checkbooks, and in other documents, Trump conspired to make the payments a business expense and therefore a business deduction. By making it a business deduction, you didn't pay taxes on that $130,000. So assuming that you're in at least a 25% tax bracket because you are a captain billionaire, I know their tax rate now is like 39%, but to make the numbers more easy for me to calculate, if you're in a 25% tax bracket, then you're talking about something in the area of $110,000. Excuse me, I'm saying that wrong. A quarter of 130 would have been 30. So another 10. So say 33, roughly 33 or so $1,000 in taxes that you avoided having to pay. That seems pretty obvious. That's what the consequence is if you book these things as business expenses, as legal expenses. That means that you got to deduct them from your income or your business's income. Either way, the taxes that were owed on that $130,000 wound up not getting paid. You deceived the government by entering these things as something different than what they were. Instead of not entering them at all because they were a personal expense. When you go buy fishing bait, you don't charge that to your business expenses, right? You just bought some fishing bait.
Right.
Well, you bought $130,000 worth of silence, from Stormy Daniels. That's a personal expense. You should not show that anywhere as anything. That's just you and you buying bread and so on. But no, Trump wanted to deduct it from his taxes. So he wanted to not only hide the affair that he was supposedly having with Stormy Daniels, he also wanted a tax deduction for the expense of defending himself from that affair. You can see how clumsy this is and how this gets you into real difficulty. So contrary to the protestations from the whiners of Mr. Trump and his allies, New York prosecutors regularly charge felony violations of the Books and Records statute and regularly win convictions when the crimes covered up were campaign finance violations resulting in false entries in business records to conceal criminal activity. For example, in Rockland County, just a little bit north of Nassau County, a guy named Richard Braga, who was a chief executive for his company, he was busted for falsifying business records by misrepresenting the source of the funds that he funneled into a campaign. So he had money come in from other corporations, right, that are friends, of the friend base of whoever it was they were trying to support in this election, had that money come in from another corporation and then funneled that money to a separate corporation to make it look like the third corporation was the source of the funds when it was the first corporation. If it had been recorded for the first corporation, there were campaign finance limits, or donation limits, on that first corporation. But if you pass it through to a third corporation, you could make it look like this just went to a political action committee and it didn't count, as far as the limits on how much money you could put into somebody's campaign. It takes a lot of words to say these things because these are complex things they do in order to find ways to get around the law. But Alvin Bragg has gotten these people 30 times already, on the same stuff. There was in Oneida County a guy named John Doe. He got busted for stealing campaign funds and then failing to properly account for them, resulting in a conviction for felony falsification of business records. In Brooklyn, there was a DA, the DA rather convicted Assemblyman Clarence Norman, and we've seen him over in this area. He's done some advocacy work for candidates in Erie County over the course of the past 20 or so years. They got him for soliciting illegal campaign contributions and for felony falsification of business records. And on and on and on. There are just dozens and dozens and dozens of these kind of cases. So they're lying when they're saying that this is, something that never gets, prosecuted in New York State. It gets prosecuted all the time. So what these cases demonstrate is that Mr. Bragg is not navigating uncharted waters as is being expressed by these complainers. Some legal analysts have pointed to an intent to defraud issue with the charges. The statute says that a person is guilty of falsifying business records when, quote, with intent to defraud. The individual commits certain acts. These analysts say that requires proving that the scheme resulted in cheating or depriving another person of property or a thing of value, and that there's no evidence that occurred in this case for Donald Trump. Well, that may sound like it makes sense, and it may make sense in other states, but this is New York State. It's not Alabama. It's not Minnesota. It's not Wisconsin. This is New York State. And in New York State, the appellate courts have held in a long series of cases that intent to defraud includes circumstances in which a defendant acts for the purpose of frustrating the state's power to faithfully carry out its own laws. To the extent that Mr. Trump was covering up campaign contributions, that violated New York law, and this seems to be exactly what Trump was trying to do. It's also worth noting, but the court after court across the country has recognized that state authorities can enforce state law in cases relating to federal candidates. So the issue about this was a federal election, the U.S. election, is irrelevant. Most of the Republicans at the state level have been claiming that states should have the ability to regulate federal elections in the first place. We just talked about that in the middle of last year, right? That they were saying that state legislatures should be the ones to decide what the rules are in a federal election. So they're trying to talk out of both sides of their mouths. They've been talking about states' rights, all day until we get to this case. Now they say, oh no, it's federal rights in this case. They always find some way to create a boogeyman and have you look at something other than what actually is going on. That seems to be their game plan. But as indicated here, fraudulently diverting funds from political action committees founded to support federal presidential campaigns, violating state law limits on corporate contributions to federal campaigns, and transgressing state laws concerning donations to political action committees that funded federal campaigns. These are things that the courts have recognized over and over and over again for decades are crimes, and that you can be prosecuted, for this behavior. So Bragg bringing a state case concerning a federal campaign is not novel. He not only alleges violations of state campaign finance law, but also alleges federal violations. He says, given that the fraudulent books and records and other relevant statutes refer simply to covering up another crime or using unlawful means and do not specify whether they need to be federal or state. This approach is wise because it throws out the case. Because to throw out the case, a judge would have to rule that Mr. Trump is covered neither by state law or by federal law. And that can't be. If you're a human being, you got to be covered by one or the other. You can't be covered by none, right? How can you be a citizen of New York State and not be covered by either state or federal law? Right. So what they say is that it's unlikely that the courts would embrace the reasoning of the people that are Trump supporters that this was unenforceable because Bragg is a state official and the crime was committed in a federal election. That's not going to fly. So what happens next is clear. Mr. Trump cannot persuasively argue that he's being singled out for some unprecedented theory of prosecution. He's being treated as any other New Yorker would be with similar evidence and similar circumstances. The indictment is therefore anything but political. If anything, and this is the core point, if anything, the more political choice would have been not to indict when there was so much scrutiny. In other words, if you had as much evidence as they had on Donald Trump and you didn't indict him, that would be the political thing that you'd be doing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Right? So that's what we're talking about here. Do we have time to talk about the post?
No, let's go to break.
Okay. Yeah. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the facts in Trump's speech after the arraignment on Tuesday night. So if you all stick with us, we will see you on the other side of the break here at Living for the People at 91.3 FM WBNY.
FM WBNY is proud to present Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman.
Welcome to Democracy Now!
Award-winning investigative journalism.
Is the NRA imploding?
Providing relevant analysis that makes you think.
Secret State Department documents, including evidence of U.S. war crimes.
Fact-finding reports you will not hear elsewhere. Democracy Now! Airs Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. on 91.3 FM, WBNY, Buffalo.
right, welcome back to Living for the People. This is L. Nathan Hare, your host. We're here with Norma Carter, who is our in-studio audience of one, and we're here with Willie H., who does the live streaming of the program. Welcome, guys.
Welcome.
So I wanted to talk a little bit. There was Trump had a rally. This has been very muffled. He had announced 3 weeks ago that he was going to be indicted. The following Tuesday. And of course, that indictment did not occur because he hadn't been told he was going to be indicted, at that point. But he was trying to create, a big show and have a bunch of people come and get all boisterous and so on. So that didn't happen. But when he was finally indicted, this was Tuesday, the 4th of this month, he was looking for a big show of support. But all you saw were reporters, maybe 60 or 80 Trump advocates and whatnot, but the rest of the people were just supporters or people just walking by and so on. So he didn't get the big media bump that he hoped that he would get. Now, he got the media bump. This is my complaint about the media in this country. They gave him all-day coverage. Right. Trump breathed, a couple times over there. Oh, man, did you see that? His chest moved up and down. There must have been air in his chest. All this trivial nonsense they're saying about, Trump. Why are you giving him all that lift, right? That just plants in people's minds that Trump is the number one guy running for president of the United States. It just plants it over and over and over again. And you're doing it day after day after day. You can't say that you're just stupid and you don't know that what you're doing is having that effect. You know that what you're doing is having that effect. You're doing this because you want the contest to be between Donald Trump and the Democrats because you think that's going to create, the most vociferous, kind of discussions, and the more interest, is going to be ramped up, in that contest. But what Trump did is he held a rally, a campaign event on Tuesday night, on April 4th. And during that rally, Trump does what Trump always does. And I only point these things out because if you don't point them out, they continue to live in the world as if they were not said. And you need to know the context of the things that Trump was saying. So, for example, Trump claimed that the Presidential Records Act requires prolonged negotiations with the National Archives and Records Administration over the return of documents. Now, when he says that, I know from most of the Trump acolytes, that sounds true, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm president of the United States. My administration is ending. I've got all these years' worth of documents and materials that I've acquired. Of course, there has to be a negotiation between me and the National Archives and Records Administration so that we can determine what I get to keep and what they get to keep. Mm-hmm. Of course, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Right.
But that's not what the law says. See, the sense that you feel about something doesn't write the law. The law writes the law. The law this is what the law says. The Presidential Records Act says that the moment a president leaves office, the National Archives and Records Administration gets custody and control of all presidential records from his administration, period. Is there any nuance in that?
Clear cut.
Right?
Well, hold up. Wait a minute. What you said is true. The law is true. However, I'm thinking the other presidents and other people that, had to move out the White House, I'm sure there was some delay. So him saying that is like, okay, yeah. I had to get some stuff to him, but the other presidents had to do that too.
Well, the reality is generally the first Tuesday in November in a presidential year is when the election takes place. So that's going to be the first week, of November. The inauguration of the next president takes place on January 20th of the following year. So you've got basically a 2.5 month period where you've got the president that's in office right now is in office during a 2.5 month period where the next president has already been elected. Mm-hmm. but has no official role yet because their administration doesn't begin until they get inaugurated, right? So during that time period, you got to settle up all your affairs. All of the bank accounts you got, all of the materials that you had. Your memoirs, whatever it is you got, anything you acquired. And any little gorilla dolls. Whatever it is you acquired during the course of your administration, you got to get all that stuff pulled together. Generally, because you're still running the country during that time period, right. You don't have time for you to do that yourself.
Right.
You have your wife's staff. If you're married, you have your wife's staff, and you have your staff. It's their job to go and pack all that stuff up.
Right.
So generally, what happens is stuff gets packed up that doesn't belong to the president, that belongs with the National Archives. So what'll happen is when everything gets unpacked, people on your staff who are doing the unpacking should say, "Oh, Mr. Clinton, you can't keep this one. This belongs to the to the archives." And Clinton would say, "Okay, put it in the archives box over there, and when you all get done, send all that stuff over to the National Archives and Records Administration."
Right.
That's not what Trump did. Trump went through all of this stuff, and he had this stuff culled out that he wanted to keep.
Right.
So it wasn't that stuff was left over.
Right.
He grabbed stuff that he wanted to keep.
And how long was it before it got to the proper authorities?
Well, we know that it was almost a year after Trump left office that they finally started to put some muscle on getting these records back from Trump.
So it was a full year.
They had been asking for months. They had been asking for these records back from him, and he kept muffle mouthing them. He just wouldn't do it.
And that's the difference with the other people or presidents. They say, "Oh, we got this. We'll give it to you," and they gave it to him right away.
And not just that, when a subpoena was actually issued, approved by a federal court, saying you have to give these records back right now,
which is different from all the other presidents.
So now we're not just in an unofficial process asking for stuff. Now you've been formally requested to do it by a subpoena issued by a federal court, and you still didn't do it. And then they got a search warrant.
Right, they had to get a
they
search warrant.
Almost broke into his house, and they gathered all the stuff, and then they found out after they walked away with 15 boxes worth of stuff that there was more stuff
missing.
Right. My count comes to something in the area of 425 different classified records that were taken by Trump, and literally thousands of non-classified records that still belong to the federal government, because that's what the National Archives and Records Administration Act says, that these documents belong to the federal government. If you need to access those documents, you go to the National Archives and Records Administration, tell them what you need to access. They'll work out your process for accessing this stuff, and you move along, right? Trump, in his rally on Tuesday night, he invoked liberal billionaire donor George Soros while criticizing District Attorney Alvin Bragg, claiming that Bragg is a radical left George Soros-backed prosecutor. Hey, I don't even know what that means. What's the crime in that? You can't be radical left? He's radical right. How come it's okay for Trump to be radical right, but it's not okay for Alvin Bragg to be radical left? And not that he is radical left, but even if he was, what's the problem with that? Right? So Trump repeatedly makes this claim to both denigrate Alvin Bragg as barely human and simultaneously to claim that Alvin Bragg is a tool of George Soros, the billionaire. A Soros spokesman named Michael Vachon told CNN that Soros and Bragg have never once communicated in any way. They've never had letters between them, emails between them. They never talked on the phone. They were never in the same meeting. That never occurred. So how could he possibly be a George Soros, tool, right? However, Soros, a longtime supporter of Democratic district attorney candidates who favor criminal justice reform, did give money to a political action committee, and that political action committee gave some funding to Bragg's district attorney campaign. So that may be, but that doesn't make him a tool of George Soros. Moving on moving presidential records out of the White House, Trump claimed that openly taking boxes of documents, which he said was mostly clothing and other things, to my home. He says, well, President Obama had done it. The Bushes did it. Jimmy Carter did it. Ronald Reagan, he did it. Everybody's done it. My voice breaks up when I try to imitate. I think my throat doesn't want to get used to mocking Donald Trump with my voice, right? But facts first. First is the statement that Donald Trump made is patently false. The National Archives and Records Administration pointed out itself pointed out in a statement last year, there is no evidence that previous presidents did anything like what Trump did after the Presidential Records Act took effect in 1981. In reality, the National Archives and Records Administration was granted custody of the presidential records of former presidents Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, and both of the George Bushes as soon as these presidents left office, as required by the Presidential Records Act. And it was the National Archives and Records Administration, not those presidents, that moved those documents to temporary archival facilities managed by the National Archives and Records Administration. In other words, it's the NARA that took the stuff out of the White House and put it in a secure place so they could go through it and figure out what belongs to the National Archives and what belongs to that president. That was done by the National Archives and Records Administration. Trump is lying when he says that Obama did. In fact, everything Trump says, he blames it on Obama first and then says, I'm only doing what Obama got away with. And, of course, Obama had never done it, so you're getting away with stuff you claim Obama got away with. On the infamous phone call with Raffensperger, Trump claimed nobody found anything wrong with that perfect call until a book promotion tour many months later. All of a sudden they said, you know, I remember Trump making a call. Let's look at that. I'm doing my best, impersonation of Donald Trump. The fact is that the Washington Post broke the story of the call the day after the call happened. Many of us were watching TV when this occurred. The day after the call happened, we all knew that this took, but the Republicans have been pumping this idea that this was something that was just somebody remembered, a year after it took place and tried to stir up some dirt over it. On inflation, Trump claimed that the United States has an economy that has been crippled by the biggest inflation that we've seen in 60 years. Well, last June, the year-over-year inflation rate hit its highest level since 1981. It was 9.1%. But 41 years does not round out to 60 years. More importantly, the year-over-year inflation, which we've talked about many times in this space, the year-over-year inflation has now declined for 8 months in a row. Now it's down to 6% if you're comparing April 7th of 2023 to April 7th of 2022. But I would suggest that you compare April 7th of 2023 to July 1 of 2022, and you'll see that the inflation is negligible, like less than 1.5% over that time period, which means that inflation has really gotten under control. It's not like we're continually seeing escalating. It's that when prices went up in the last half of 2021 and the first half of 2022, the prices stayed at that high level. Now, they've fallen significantly, but look what's happening with gas prices. I need to say this, Norm, before you say this. I just want to remind people again, the only defense you have against these people who are charging us so much for our gasoline is not buying the gasoline at all. Mm-hmm. You just have to find a way. If you normally filled up once a week, spread it out that you fill up once every 10 days. If you drove everywhere find things that you can do where you could ride with somebody else or you can walk to it, and reduce the amount of money you spend by at least 10% on gasoline. If everybody does this, they'll bring those gas prices down fairly quickly because they got to sell gas in order to make money.
That's right.
Go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, our spending affects the way things are done and the way that they charge us. So that's definitely true. I was just wondering, as far I wanted to kind of go back to Elvin Bragg. I'm wondering, with all of these indictments, how many people have been prosecuted, all the way through and had to really, do prison time behind his.
Well, he says in his record that he alone has brought 30 cases.
30 cases.
That's just him. That's not counting other assistant DAs in his office. And that's just in the last year.
And
if we looked at the past 10 years, there's probably 500 cases, like this, maybe 1,000 that have been brought. They've been successful in something like 90 to 95% of their cases end up in convictions.
Okay.
Because they don't bother to prosecute unless they have documents. They don't go on what they hear. They go on what they can read.
Well, with that being said, as we kind of went through, the media is basically spinning this to where a lot of these things are smallish. And with that being said, anytime you commit a crime, it's not smallish at all.
Right.
It needs to be addressed.
Right.
And so bringing these cases is that he's, to me, seems like he's doing a great job.
And the problem is that Trump continues to do every vile thing you can do in office. He exploits every advantage he thinks that he can exploit. He breaks the rules every time he feels like, breaking the rules with no consequence to it. So once you have a guy like that in your crosshairs and you could bring some accountability to him, you have to do it. If you don't, he'll just walk away.
Also, something I forgot also. I was just wondering, with the way that they're looking at the economy and how things are, I'm wondering if the unemployment rate, they talking about inflation and everything, but how's the unemployment? Hasn't that been dropped?
The unemployment rate is still at 3.5%.
3.5%, right? Which is one of the lowest.
Right. And the new jobs that were created in March came to something like 238,000 jobs. So even though that's 100,000 jobs lower than what was created in February, it's still above the average of number of jobs that are created month to month over the history of the country.
Yeah.
So it means that Biden is way ahead of the performance curve on employment. Yet they keep and remember how the media is talking out of both sides of their necks. They're saying on the one hand that we're trusting Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, to be making the right decisions, jacking up interest rates and causing fundamental increases in pricing because you're building in the cost of borrowing, increased cost of borrowing into those prices, which causes people to buy less because things cost more. If things cost more, fewer people are going to buy it, right? So that's not deflating, right? That's inflating. And the people that are being punished by that are the people that are the low-income workers, the ones that are in jobs that are more sensitive, to lower demand. Those are the people that end up getting hurt the first and the worst. Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Those are the people that get hurt first and get hurt the worst.
Yeah.
So that's been my objection to Powell's strategy in the first place. But the media talks about it like, well, unemployment, jobs, still a lot of jobs out here, and a lot of people are working. Unemployment rate is still way down. We got to get inflation under control. So you want to punish people by creating more unemployed people so that you have fewer people that can afford to buy stuff at the price points that they are right now. And then that would somehow begin to slow down inflation. Inflation is already slowed down. You don't need to do anything more to slow inflation. Inflation has been almost steady. I mean, almost zero for the past 7 months or 8 months in a row, maybe closer to 9 months in a row. And so we're being conned, by these people. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. It can't be both a bad thing and a good thing.
That's the point I was trying to make. It's almost like the media is very self-serving as far as the way that they want to represent things, because if they keep a conflict going between a positive on Trump, which really isn't the case, and then they want to talk inflation with Biden, like that's his, like he's, even when the unemployment rate is really, really low and the positive things he's doing, it's just like they're keeping a constant thing going back and forth.
Yep.
Yep.
So let me real quickly talk about, because we got about 5 minutes to talk about, maybe you got 7 minutes.
7, you got about
right.
7. Yeah.
To talk about Tennessee. And I know that you all didn't care because Tennessee is down south and y'all don't roll with all of that. But the South is a part of America too. And in Tennessee, they said that you 3 people over there, you're complaining about gun rights. We're believers in gun rights. We believe that everybody ought to have like shotguns, airplanes, Molotov cocktails, surface-to-air missiles, jets, war jets, F-16s. Everybody should have everything, right? So that we could all be able to fight the government. If the government ever turned against us, we'd be in a position to fight back. That's what we all need to be able to do. That's the rationale of the National Rifles Association. So you got these 3 people who are reacting to the fact that in Tennessee, just a few weeks ago, we had 6 people killed, 3 adults and 3 9-year-old children. 3 9-year-old children. Wow. One of the children's mothers was in the crowd that came to the Capitol in Tennessee, asking for support to do something about the access to guns that seems to be chronic, in this society. Yeah. Just like everybody, has a gun. And not only do they have a gun, they have the most lethal guns you can possibly get your hands on. These automatic rifles or close to automatic rifles and so on. And so these people that came to protest, because the people in the assembly in Tennessee didn't seem to be reacting to this gun violence issue that had come to Tennessee. And I mean, even if they didn't agree with the protesters, they at least could have met with them. They could have talked with them. They could have said, well, I hear what you're saying, but this is what we're saying. Try to figure out some happy medium, right? What is there that went on with the shooter in Tennessee that looks like if you had caught that, you would have prevented this crime from occurring in the first place? Can we regulate that thing? I mean, at least give the people some sense that you're listening to them and you're trying to help them figure out a way to solve a problem that they feel they have. Doesn't matter whether you feel it's a problem. If they're the citizens and you're supposed to be the citizens' representatives, if the citizens say that they've got a problem, you should be trying to figure out a way to help the citizens solve the problems that they say they have, right? Well, that's what was going on here. Well, what they did, I think we got a caller coming in. What went on here is they threw 3 of the legislators out and expelled them from the legislature. Right? Can I get that call right quick? There we go.
You can get that call.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Hi, caller. Are you there?
Yes, I am. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you feeling?
Very good, thanks. Great day here. I just wanted to, even though it's a great day, I wanted to pose a fast, cynical comment about your topic right now, because unfortunately, guns are so intoxicating for many people that I feel as though something has to happen to, unfortunately, a Republican or people in power, such as the Brady bill happened because the president's assistant was shot.
Yep.
So unfortunately, I hope and pray nothing horrible happens, but something like that has to happen to make the other side recognize that nobody needs AR-15s flat out. Nobody needs those.
Remember what a Tennessee assembly person said when he was confronted by a reporter on what you just said. You know, does it have to be that, you know, what's the fix? Is there something that we can do? Do we have to wait until something horrible happens? And he looked at this reporter and says, there's no fix. We can't, he said, we can't fix this, and walked away, right? Wow. Now, see, that's what turns into the intense protest. You know, you're going to get people coming to your office and saying, I need to meet with you, 6, 7 people. They want to give you their spin on whatever the issue is. But when you talk to people as arrogantly as this guy spoke to people, saying there's no fix, you know, and there's nothing that we can do, there's no fix, and turns his back and walks away, that's what gets people so jacked up emotionally that they want to have a big emotional response to you. And that's what went on in that Capitol building assembly meeting in Tennessee.
Not surprising, but unfortunate to hear, that's for sure. Well, here's to hoping that this country gets some sanity at some point in time, because they're never going to ban all guns, but just to make some sense out of at least the automatic weapons. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. And I just want you all to remember that from 1994 to 2004, that 10-year period, we had an assault weapons ban, a law that governed access to those kinds of weapons. And the number of incidences of mass shootings and gun violence, it didn't shrink tremendously, but it started moving in the right direction. We could start fewer and fewer and fewer every year. If we reinstated that, we'll have the same effect. You'll see fewer and fewer of these incidences. The reality is it's not just that we have so many guns, we have so many guns in particular people's possession. In other words, there's like 420 million guns that are owned by private citizens in the United States today. There are only 331 million people in the United States. So we're talking about 120 million more guns than there are people. Mm-hmm. And according to my understanding through the, the Brennan Center, indicates that only a third of American adults own guns. Wow. So that means, assuming that 331 million people are all adults, that would mean that 110 million of those people own guns. Mm-hmm. If there's 420 million guns in private possession,
3 or 4 each.
That means 4 guns apiece.
Right, 4 guns apiece.
4 guns apiece. Now, you can't tell me that everybody needs 4 AR-15s.
Right.
I just can't. I can't accept that. That doesn't make any sense. If we just reduce that down to 1 AR-15, you would take 300 million of these weapons off the street immediately. Right. Okay. I'm not asking for anybody to take your guns. I'm just saying that we need to find a way to reduce the impulse in people to go to a gun in order to solve a conflict between you and somebody else. Okay.
Too easy to get guns, and definitely too easy to get automatic weapons.
And too easy to use them.
Yeah, definitely.
Just too easy to use them, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this thing with Tennessee, it was crazy that it occurred, that the Republicans actually voted to expel these people. Then they had a hearing on the expulsions for each one of them individually. Black guy goes up, he does his little expository on why he was there, what he was protesting over, and so on. They immediately said, "Okay, get out. You can never be an assembly person again. Get out and leave your coat. You know, we want to check your pockets to make sure you didn't steal anything, right?" And they throw him out. A white woman, she comes in, she does her expository, and they say, "Okay, you can stay." And then the black guy, the other black guy who was being expelled, he had his say, and they threw him out. So you know what this is going to turn into, right? Now it's not only did you not like these people because they were anti-guns, you attacked them because they were black, and you let the white woman off. You know, for
double
the same
standard. Double standard.
This is not going to go away. I took too long to get to this, so we'll have to get back on this on Monday. but I'm hoping that you all are seeing what's going on here. This is what happens when you have a party allowed to be able to use its majorities to actually take rights away from people that people already have. The very thing the 14th Amendment says you cannot do, that's what's being done by these Republican-led assemblies across this country. Thank you all for listening to us and supporting us. We look forward to talking to you all on Monday here at Living for the People on 91.3 FM WBNY. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Leave your guns underneath your mattress, okay? Don't bring them out of the house with you. We look forward to talking to you all on Monday. See you then.